Hi, and welcome back, Missional Vocation Pathway. Here we are. This time we're talking about vocational liturgies. This should be a new idea for a lot of you. I think it's going to be really helpful, though. We've talked in this week about Daniel 1, maintaining his allegiance, about how his integrity is held firm in Daniel chapter 6. Today we're talking about how the forces of our workplace shape us. And then we'll finish up this week by talking about 1 Peter, what it's like to live as an exile. Here's the basic idea we want to communicate with this video. We are shaped by our habits. We are shaped as individuals. We are shaped as communities. We are shaped internally in powerful ways by the things that we do repeatedly. As an employee at your workplace, there are things that you are required to do repeatedly. And what we want to have a little more awareness of is how those repeated tasks, what we're calling liturgies, shape you in ways that you might not be aware of. This idea that we're shaped by our habits is very common. There's a string of recent books that have come out: Atomic Habits, The Power of Habit. Of course, you have the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Tiny Habits. This idea that we can change who we are by changing some of the ways that we act regularly is a very common idea. It goes back to thousands of years ago. What we want to really focus on is how that happens in the workplace. Listen to what James K.A. Smith says. He says, liturgy, as I'm using the word, is a shorthand term for those rituals that are loaded with an ultimate story about who we are and what we're for. They carry within them a kind of ultimate orientation. Think of these liturgies as calibration technologies. They bend the needle of our hearts. So what we want to be thinking about in the context of our workplace is, what are the things that we do regularly, and how are those activities calibrating us? How are they bending the needle of our hearts? Think of it this way. There's an understanding that we often have about how we work as humans, that we have these beliefs within us, and those beliefs form our values, and then our values result in the actions that we do in the world. This is a very common way of understanding human nature. We believe something, that means things are important to us, and that controls our behavior. And that is often the way things work. But what we don't realize is that it often also works in the opposite way. It often works such that our actions, the things that we do, shape our values, and those values then become internalized as beliefs. Now, this is just the way humans work, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. This is why discipline is helpful. It's why habits can be powerful. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we want to realize then that the actions that we are doing in our workplace, day after day, week after week, year after year, those actions are actually forming us, and they can be internalized as beliefs, whether we realize it or not. The question we want to ask is, how are the liturgies of the workplace forming you? So think about what you normally do in a week. What are the standing meetings you have? Think about what you normally do in a quarter. Maybe there's a quarter end report. Think about your review cycle. Maybe there's daily stand-up meetings that you have. Maybe there's reports. Maybe there's some rhythm of your workplace. And think about how all of those actions, all of those behaviors, even coming to work in the morning, sitting down at your desk, or maybe rolling out of bed if you work remotely, checking your email, checking Slack, doing whatever. Think about how those actions have an underlying assumption of what's important. It's important to be reachable. It's important to be prompt. It's important to respond in a certain way. And those values then become internalized as beliefs. One of my favorite examples is the review cycle. Think about how your company does reviews. You are reviewed based on how your behavior conforms to a certain pattern. And as you do that year after year, it's very easy for those values to become internalized so that they shape the core of who you are. This is the process that's described in the Bible as discipline. The author of Hebrews says, for the moment, all discipline seems painful. Discipline is really just a repeated action rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So the author of Hebrews is suggesting that by doing discipline that isn't what we would prefer to do, it seems painful because it doesn't line up with what we want to do, it can actually shape us. Think about it this way. All discipline, this is repeated action, practice regularly, seems painful rather than pleasant because we're doing it even if we don't want to do it. But later it yields, this is the training over time, the peaceful fruit of righteousness that has a formative effect. And so the same process can be observed with our workplace liturgies. All discipline, all of the workplace liturgies, maybe it seems painful at first rather than pleasant. It's an enforced repetition. You have to come to this stand-up. You have to do your review cycle. You have to have these meetings. It's something that is drilled into you, but it shapes over time the personal formation. And so it makes you into a responsive person, or it makes you into a person who believes the values of your workplace. Now, we're not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. It could be a very good thing. Sometimes those values that our workplaces want to form us with are very good values that we would affirm. The problem is that we're not aware of it. We're not seeing it. It happens underneath the surface, and so we don't always recognize how we're being formed by these workplace liturgies. So the goal here is to increase our awareness of how the regular patterns of our workplace life shape our internal character. The goal, let me say that again, is to recognize how the repeated patterns of our workplace life shape our internal character. To do that, we have an assignment for you. It's the liturgical analysis assignment, we call it. And the purpose of this assignment is to help all of us identify the cultural practices that we regularly engage in, and then reflect on the formative effect that they have on us. How are they shaping us? There's a detailed discussion of the idea of cultural liturgies that we link to here. This is not an idea that is unique to us. But what you do in this assignment is to just think about those practices that you do regularly in the workplace. Maybe it's a daily stand-up check-in. And then think about what the intended effect of that is. You are required to do that because you want to keep the team on the same page. Now you want to go a little deeper and say, what's the underlying value that is driving that behavior in your workplace? It's alignment in this case. The value is that everybody is aligned on the same goals. And then think about, how does it form you? Are there ways that you don't realize? Maybe you spend a lot of your time throughout the day thinking about what you're going to say at that next daily stand-up. And so maybe you're doing your work not actually for the sake of alignment, but so that you can show up a certain way. Maybe when you go to your review every 6 months or every year, you end up changing the way you work, not for the sake of what the review is getting at, but so that you look good in your review. That's the column we really want to think about. How is this practice forming you in ways that you might not have been aware of before taking the time to reflect? I encourage you to make this a prayerful exercise to invite the Spirit of God to give you discernment, wisdom, insight. Talk to your coworkers, talk to people you know, if that would be helpful. Think about the practices, the intended effect, the values, and how they shape you. That's the idea of vocational liturgies. They are really ways that we're putting into practice the ideas that we learned from Daniel 1 about allegiance and Daniel 6 about integrity. We're trying to say, what are the forces in our particular workplace that are trying to shape us? And in our last video, we'll see what it looks like to be faithful in the midst of those.